During the mid to late 80s, Formula 1 was exploding in popularity. Satellite TV meant that the broadcasting and promotion of the sport was bigger and better than ever. Tobacco sponsorship was also at its absolute peak and flooding the sport with cash. With the ban on turbo engines after 1988, it also became simpler and cheaper to acquire a decent enough engine from companies like Judd and Cosworth, and the world financially was also growing rapidly before a recession in the early 90s. All of this meant that for a sport that had so much appeal and was making more and more money in the booming 80s, more drivers than ever before wanted to race in Formula 1, more companies wanted to get their brands on the cars and in front of the cameras, and more people wanted a piece of the action and to actually own a Formula 1 team. Between 1985 and 1991, 15 new teams joined Formula 1, with most of them lasting only 2 or 3 seasons before they left. With such a chaotic influx and turnaround of brand new teams, you'll be shocked to hear that the types of characters that had the money to back these teams weren't exactly nuns and upstanding citizens. There were oil barons, bankers, filmmakers, serial killers, fashion designers, and Saudi royal family members. Basically, regardless of how crazy you were, if you had money in the 80s, whether it was legal or not, you probably also had a Formula 1 team. And the craziest of them all was this guy, Jean-Pierre van Rossem. And now, let's get this out the way early. The man certainly earns the prize for the strangest looking team owner in Formula 1 history. Not only was he quite literally huge, but the long, greasy hair, the long, greasy beard, and the yellowish aviators certainly gave him a unique look in the F1 paddock that raised a few eyebrows. Van Rossem was a Belgian Marxist economist who tried to beat the capitalist system. Whilst studying at the University of Ghent, he won a national prize for his dissertation, which was about trying to predict financial trends in Belgium. He was given a scholarship to study under a man called Lawrence Klein in the US at the University of Pennsylvania, which was one of the first ever business schools and also one of the most prestigious universities in the field of economics. He would eventually go into business as a stock market guru, and by the 1980s, he had claimed that he invented a supercomputer by perfecting Klein's studies, which could accurately predict and beat the stock market trends, achieving massive profits. The name that he gave to his investment company and the supercomputer itself was Moneytron. Of course, for the most part, it was all just smoke and mirrors. Whilst collecting a 5% commission to fund his lavish lifestyle from every new investor with the promise of high profits, these profits would actually come from newer investors, and so it creates a cycle which requires a steady stream of new investors to fund the old ones. This, ladies and gentlemen, is called a good old-fashioned pyramid scheme. As you can imagine, no one ever actually saw the Moneytron supercomputer, as it was locked up in a room that only Van Rossem had the keys to, conveniently. But regardless, Van Rossem appearing as rich and successful from the money that he had, and selling himself as an eccentric stock market guru, convinced hundreds of people to invest into Moneytron, and amazingly, the con worked. In fact, it worked too well. At his peak, he claimed to be managing $7 billion worth of assets, including money from the Belgian royal family and other heads of state, and managed to accumulate a personal fortune of between $500 million and $860 million. So what does a man with all of that other people's money spend it on? Well, he bought no fewer than 108 Ferraris, heroin, an $89 million yacht, 7 castles, cocaine, and 2 Falcon 900 planes. Apart from money, Van Rossem's passions were described as Ferraris and motorsports, meaning his involvement with Formula 1 was only a matter of time. And it's here where the Onyx team steps into the picture. Onyx was a race team that was involved in Formula 3000, which at the time was the Formula 2 equivalent of what we have now for drivers looking to get into F1. The team was run by Mike Earl and owned by a man called Paul Shakespeare, and by the mid-1980s, they were a relatively successful F3000 team, with their big moment coming in 1987 when they won the F3000 championship with future F1 driver Stefano Modena. Mike Earl had always intended to take Onyx to F1 and even tried to do so unsuccessfully in the early 80s. However, now with Onyx becoming a respected and successful team in the junior formula, and with F1 becoming more viable as a step up due to the factors I mentioned at the start of the video, it meant Onyx's time was now. However, before anyone could go racing, they needed one thing: money. And this is where Moneytron stepped in. For their debut season in 1989, Onyx's driver lineup was a mixture of experience and youth, with ex-McLaren and Ferrari driver Stefan Johansson and promising young Belgian rookie Bertrand Gachot. It was through Gachot that Onyx was introduced to his fellow countryman Van Rossem and his Moneytron money-making machine. Van Rossem jumped at the chance to sponsor and fund the team, and so this is how the Onyx Moneytron Formula 1 team was born. With the Moneytron money in the bank, team principal Mike Earl gets to work. He secures Ford Cosworth engines, Goodyear tires, and most importantly, hires ex-McLaren designer Alan Jenkins, who won 3 constructors and 2 drivers' titles at McLaren, as Onyx's new technical director. Everything at Onyx came together very late at the end of 1988. The team went from 18 people to 75 people overnight, and in the words of Mike Earl, on December 5th, 1988, the car only existed on paper. 3 months later, it was already being raced. Designer Alan Jenkins put his heart and soul into what became the Onyx ORE1. Stefan Johansson described the car as fantastic for a first car. Despite being very fragile and not actually having a huge amount of downforce, it was efficient and had a lot of smart thinking behind it, with a transverse gearbox and also some trick front suspension. It showed that the ideas and people behind it were solid and that the team had a lot of potential. Going into the first race of 1989 in Rio, the car had never ran, the drivers had never even turned a wheel, and even the engine had never even been started. The Onyx got its first ever shakedown a couple of days before the Grand Prix at a local go-kart track just outside of Rio to make sure that it actually worked. Now, imagine being Bertrand Gachot going into your first ever F1 weekend around a track that you've never driven at before, and the only time you've driven your brand new Formula 1 car was around a go-kart track a couple of days before. Yep, brilliant. For 1989, 21 teams had registered to compete. However, after first racing never even made it to Brazil, it meant 20 teams and as many as 39 cars were entered into the Grand Prix weekend. Keep in mind at this time, points were only handed out to the top 6 finishers. The growing number of cars being entered became a problem for Formula 1 because for the race, there was only 26 grid slots. That is why for 1989 F1 introduced pre-qualifying for all of the teams at the back of the grid. On Friday morning before free practice, there was an entirely separate 1-hour session called pre-qualifying. 13 cars would be in that session with only the top 4 being allowed to progress to the rest of the weekend. If you didn't pre-qualify, then that's it. You had to clear your pit box by 9 AM so that the proper teams can begin their practice, and you had to go home. However, even if you pre-qualified and were one of the 30 cars allowed to take part in the weekend, because there were only 26 grid slots, you could still be one of the 4 slowest cars who would get knocked out after regular qualifying and wouldn't be able to start the race. Whilst pre-qualifying from the outside looked fun, watching all of the worst teams go head-to-head, from the inside for the drivers and the teams, it was absolute hell. The tracks during mornings were usually in terrible condition from the night before, you usually had only one set of tyres for the entire hour, and the entire time you had to be praying to God that your car didn't break down, so that at least you could get to the end of the session when the track was at its best to set a semi-decent time. And needless to say, for a team like Onyx coming in with absolutely no testing, it was definitely trial by fire. During the first 3 races of the season, the Onyx drivers failed to pre-qualify in every single session. In Brazil, they were last in pre-qualifying, finishing 12th and 13th, with the suspension breaking on Gachot's car and then Johansson suffering from fuel-related problems. Johansson was still optimistic, however, saying, "The car was just too new and it would have been a miracle to have been without problems. I know it's good, but we never really had a chance." Despite the disappointment on track, Van Rossem decides not to step back, but to double down on his involvement in the team. He ends up buying a majority stake in the team from Paul Shakespeare and invests $15 million into Onyx. Mike Earl, speaking in 2017, said, "We were lucky Jean-Pierre Van Rossem came along. One thing that came through like burning lights, he was an enthusiast, an absolute enthusiast. He stepped up to the plate and gave us an opportunity to race what we thought was a good car. Yeah, I'll always be appreciative of what he did. How he did it? I don't know." Jean-Pierre Van Rossem had just gone from enigmatic title sponsor to a front and center team owner. Within the paddock, his looks and eccentric personality started to draw a lot of media attention, and given how outspoken Van Rossem was, he didn't see this as a problem, but more as an opportunity. He started bringing in models dressed in Monitron Onyx colors, and in general, he was trying to build an image and make some noise to put himself and his team in the headlines. Randomly, at one point, he put out a story in the media that Alain Prost and Gerhard Berger were offered $10 million to race for Onyx in 1990, and it was all a tactic to make the team look bigger and better than it was to potential sponsors. Over the next few races, the team finally started to make some progress, and during the middle portion of the season, both of the drivers started to regularly get out of pre-qualifying and then qualify pretty well for the actual Grand Prix. Don't get me wrong, there were still major reliability issues, clutch issues in Mexico, suspension failure in the US, and then in Canada, the wheel gun was left attached to the car after a pit stop, causing the team to get disqualified. France was the team's first taste of success. It was the first time that both of the drivers got out of pre-qualifying, and for the race, Johansson qualified in 14th, whilst Gachot qualified in 11th. After avoiding some incidents at turn 1, the two Onyx cars found themselves running in 4th and 5th, with Gachot leading the way. And now keep in mind, despite us being midway through the season, this was Bertrand Gachot's actual Grand Prix debut. Before this race, he had never made it to proper qualifying, meaning he had never even started a race or experienced the pressure of a Grand Prix. And yet despite that, on his Grand Prix debut, he was leading his more experienced teammate. However, this is where misfortune would strike yet again. Late on in the race, Gachot suffered a battery issue, dropping him out of the points and snatching away a points finish on his debut. Luckily, Stefan Johansson managed to just cling on to finish 5th and score the team's first ever points in Formula 1. The reaction afterwards from team principal Mike Earl was mixed, saying that, "Whilst one part of you feels great, the other part of you feels frustrated that Bertie dropped out and that the team didn't score points with both cars." On track, whilst the car was finally showing some decent pace, the points finish didn't exactly fix their reliability problems. Overheating in Germany, a double gearbox issue in Hungary, and wheel bearing problems in Spa. Off track, however, Van Rossem was back to making headlines. For 1991, Porsche announced that they would make a comeback to Formula 1 as an engine supplier. And now, for context, ironically when they did come back, their engine was an absolute disaster, but regardless, this was a big, revolving story during 1989, with multiple teams chasing to get that elusive Porsche engine deal. Van Rossem saw it as a priority, even threatening to sell the team in the media if he couldn't secure the Porsche engines. What followed is one of the most bizarre stories I have ever heard, but one that summarizes Van Rossem perfectly. Both Mike Earl and Van Rossem jump on his jet and head to Weissach in Germany to meet with Ulrich Bez, Porsche's head of motorsports. Mike Earl describes being shocked to see Van Rossem wearing a suit for once, understanding the importance of the deal. However, on the plane ride over whilst eating an egg mayonnaise baguette, Van Rossem spills mayonnaise all over his shirt, hair and beard. I'm not joking. With a beard and shirt full of mayonnaise, remarkably, there is some kind of agreement that's reached that's never been fully clarified between Onyx and Porsche for 1991, but under one condition: the information must remain confidential. So what does Van Rossem do? He jumps on television and talks all about the brand new Porsche engine deal that Onyx have just secured for 1991. Unsurprisingly, the Germans didn't find Van Rossem jumping the gun very amusing and call him back to say the deal is off. Van Rossem, outraged at Porsche pulling the plug, got into his Porsche, drove it into the centre of Brussels, and set it on fire to make sure that his message was also received. You would think that would be the worst of it, but no. Van Rossem decided that what he really needed to do to improve his public image after the Porsche fiasco was even more controversy, and this time took aim at F1 Supremo Bernie Ecclestone and the FIA president Jean-Marie Balest. During a press conference, not only did he say that Ecclestone was part of the mafia, but on Balest he said, "Balest is senile, and I refuse to have anything to do with him given his Nazi past. He was elected democratically like Hitler was in Germany in 1933. Now, not to be pedantic, but being democratically elected doesn't actually make you Hitler, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. You will be shocked to know that his comments calling the man who runs Formula 1 a mafioso and the man who writes the rules in Formula 1 a Nazi went down like a lead balloon, with Bernie Ecclestone banning Van Rossem from the paddock." Despite Van Rossem causing absolute havoc, during the remaining 4 races, Onyx would achieve a miracle, but not before yet more controversy coming in to the Portuguese Grand Prix. A rookie Bertrand Gachot was dropped by Van Rossem, despite the fact that he was the one who originally brought Van Rossem into Onyx in the first place. The reason for the sacking was put down to Gachot making critical comments about the team in the media, but in reality, a rookie JJ Leto was brought in because his manager and F1 world champion Keke Rosberg promised Onyx and Van Rossem cash in exchange for giving his driver the seat. The driver swap chaos was luckily overshadowed that weekend because in Portugal, Onyx in their debut season would score their first ever podium with Stefan Johansson. Johansson was fastest in pre-qualifying and then qualified 12th for the race. The team decided to gamble on a no-stop strategy and during the Sunday warm-up session, put the tyres through a heat cycle by running them very hard for a lap or two, which caused them to harden and increase their tyre life, but worsened their initial performance. I can't undersell just how much Johansson's experience was crucial to getting this result. He needed to drive fast enough to actually get into a good position, but not too fast as so to run out of tyres and fuel. He had to hold his nerve and not make any mistakes under pressure from the cars behind on fresher tyres. He also had to pray to God that absolutely nothing broke, and after driving a very clean and relatively uneventful race, for once, luck was on Onyx's side. Up at the front, Nigel Mansell and Ayrton Senna collided, taking each other out of the race, and the two Williamses also retired with reliability issues, opening up the opportunity for a big result. Johansson would go on to achieve the impossible, finishing in 3rd. During the last few laps, he described having to nurse his tyres so much because he could actually see the metal canvas, they were so shot. And after the race, amazingly, he actually ran out of fuel on the slowing down lap and famously missed the podium because he was too busy running back to the paddock before turning up right at the end when Berger and Prost started to spray the champagne. The Onyx Moneytron Formula 1 team became one of only 2 teams in Formula 1 history to score a podium after having to pre-qualify for the race, and they also are the only team in Formula 1 to do so in their first season in Formula 1 as a brand new team. Out of the 20 teams in 1989, Onyx finished 10th in the championship, which today would be 5th or 6th. The team that had shaken down their car before the first race of the season on a go-kart track and had the craziest F1 owner behind them had achieved a piece of Formula 1 history that will never be repeated. Onyx will always hold a very special place in my heart. Controversially, I'm probably one of only 2 people in the world, including Van Rossem, who actually loves their blue and pink livery. They had a fantastic group of people working for them with Mike Earl and Alan Jenkins. Their initial driver lineup was also brilliant with Stefan Johansson and Bertrand Gachot, and ultimately, even though Jean-Pierre Van Rossem did many things wrong, his passion, enthusiasm and willingness to invest in Onyx allowed the team to achieve as much as they did. This team, with more stable funding and the really strong group of people that it already had, could have become a team like Jordan, who would join later in 1991 and still lives on today as Aston Martin. Unfortunately, Van Rossem and his Moneytron money predictably ran out. He knew that he couldn't fund the team for 1990, and so Onyx was sold to Swiss businessman Peter Monteverdi. Mike Earl would leave the team in December of 1989, and Stefan Johansson was fired by Monteverdi 2 races into 1990 because he couldn't afford his contract. The team never scored another podium, they never scored another point, and after 10 races in 1990, they folded for good after the Hungarian Grand Prix. Speaking about his time with Jean-Pierre Van Rossem after he passed away in 2018, Mike Earl, looking back at his time with Onyx, said, "It was sad to hear he died, because without him, we probably wouldn't have got to Formula 1. He was flamboyant and unpredictable, but without doubt, highly intelligent and ultimately a nice guy if you sat down with him away from the limelight." Johansson, who scored that incredible third-place finish, also showed support for Van Rossem.
Kind of miss personalities like him in racing, you know, that's part of the whole thing, you know, very big, flamboyant, you know, well, it makes it interesting. What we did has never been repeated. I mean, no one's ever done what we did in the first year on any level in Formula One, I don't think. So, you know, considering the resources we had and the circumstances of how it all came together, I think I'm extremely proud of what we did.
His life continued to be just as colourful even after Formula 1. In 1991, he was handed a 5-year prison sentence for fraud, but instead ended up starting his own political party and being elected, which many believed was because politicians got immunity from prison sentences. After eventually serving out his sentence and into the 2000s, he still remained a bit of a celebrity, being an expert in economics and politics, and appeared numerous times on Belgian and Dutch TV. For all of his faults, he was definitely a unique and colourful team principal who made his mark on Formula 1 for both good and bad reasons. And so now, to end the video on a bit more of a light-hearted note, here is a video of him falling off a bike on TV. Enjoy.
Kijk, en Jean-Pierre kan ook fietsen tegen onoverkomelijke hindernissen. Kijk, Jean-Pierre. Oh, oh, oh. Shit. Shit, Jean-Pierre. Godverdomme, shit.
Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.